Childhood emotional neglect is often undetected because it's not as noticeable and memorable as abuse and abandonment. It's due to a lack of action, lack of response, lack of validation of your emotion. Your parents could take care of your physical needs, for example, like your shelter, the food, clothing, and money, but they may not be sensitive enough to pick up on your emotion and know what you're feeling. They don't mirror your emotion back to you, and that may make you feel neglected. But you may not realize this until much later in your life when you become an adult. Let me share with you one interesting story from my life. So many years ago, one of my colleagues brought her newborn into the office and her baby was crying in the stroller. But they didn't do anything to attend to the crying baby. They were taught that if you give too much attention to the baby, then they will over rely on you. I'm not a parent, but it felt very off to me at that time, and I didn't know why. Years later, I realized I was that baby. I woke up in the middle of the night with this image of me as a 2 to 3 year old boy, and I wanted my parents to carry me and hug me, but they refused. And later that year, I observed something very interesting. My auntie had a birthday party. She invited our family and some of her friends to the party. After the event, my mom was hugging my auntie's friends like she doesn't know them, but she was open and friendly and hugging them. And that reminded me of like, hey, in my family, we don't have the habit of hugging each other. I was wondering why my mom was so warm to strangers, but when it comes to her own family, she doesn't display any physical affection. So when we went back home, I told this observation to my family. I stood up and wanted to hug my mom, but I was standing there and she wasn't moving at all. My elder brother actually says that, hey, he's already standing there, like he's already like initiating a hug. Why aren't you hugging him? And then my mom stood up and she gave me a side pat. Then I realized that, hey, this whole time I was actually like neglected when I was a child. I don't remember anything when I was a child, but the emotional pain is still locked in my unconscious mind and stays in my body. Childhood emotional neglect can impact your adult life in ways that you may not have realized. In this video, I'm going to share 4 signs you have been emotionally neglected in childhood, but you might not be aware of. Being aware of this sign will help you to see the problem in a different light, so that you can take action to heal your inner child and free yourself from this problem, so that you can have a better understanding of yourself and a better relationship with others. I will also compare the signs between someone who has childhood emotional neglect and someone who doesn't have childhood emotional neglect. What are the differences? Number 1, chronic loneliness. Everyone feels lonely from time to time, but people with childhood emotional neglect experience this differently. Our kind of loneliness isn't due to a lack of company or being isolated from other people. We can be surrounded with people like our loved ones, like our friends and family, but yet we're still very lonely and feel like there's something missing. It's like they don't understand us from a deeper level. This kind of loneliness is due to a lack of understanding and empathy from the people that you care about. It's not because of the lack of company. So how does childhood emotional neglect leads to loneliness? Imagine yourself now you are a baby, and when you are a baby, before your thoughts are even formed, all you have is emotion. When you feel hungry, you cry, and you cannot speak. You can only communicate through your emotions. Your sense of self at that time was tied to your emotion, and when your parents and caretaker doesn't acknowledge this emotion, they also doesn't acknowledge you. So they don't acknowledge a part of you that is important to you at that time. Imagine how lonely and how isolated it is for the newborn to experience this trauma on their own. They have to cry and they have no idea how to soothe themselves. This actually creates a withdrawal cycle in your adult life. When you talk to people and it doesn't seem to understand you, you might give up easily, like because in your childhood you have tried to relate to other people, but they didn't give you your attention, they didn't give you the empathy. And so as an adult, you feel the same way. You feel like the other party will not give you the understanding that you desire. So you may withdraw and isolate yourself from others so as to not feel the pain of not being understood. But people may think that you're not interested in them or that you are cold and aloof, so they don't come to you and they don't bother you. And when they leave you alone, that makes you feel more lonely and isolated. Also, when you don't share your emotion, people will find it more difficult to understand you. I remember when I was a teen, like I was 13 years old, I don't share my emotion or what I feel to other people at all. I'll just write messages and bury them in the ground. And later, when I became an adult, I became more open in sharing what I feel. And my parents could understand me better when I tell them how I actually felt. So be really mindful of this withdrawn cycle. If you have the belief that other people is not going to understand you and you don't be open and more expressive in what you truly think and feel, then people will find it even more difficult to understand you. Number 2, relationship problems, especially being attracted to emotionally unavailable people. Due to the loneliness and lack of emotional response, people with childhood emotional neglect often yearn for someone else to acknowledge and validate their emotions. But the interesting thing is, we often pick people that are emotionally unavailable. People who avoid intimacy and commitment, people who are a bit cold and distant, people who give you mixed signal and pulls away. There are many people out there who have a healthy relationship with their emotion or are emotionally stable, but we pick people who are emotionally closed off. Why? Because we are just trying to reenact the same childhood trauma or the situation. We're not just yearning for love and validation. We are yearning for that particular person who doesn't acknowledge our emotion to validate us, because they represent our parents, the most desired kind of love that we cannot have. People with childhood emotion neglect are in the vibration of not having what they want. So we will go to people who don't love us or cannot give us what we want. If someone gives you what you want, you will actually find them less attractive. People with childhood emotional neglect often develop an anxious attachment style. When our partner doesn't give us enough attention, it triggers our anxiety. We easily feel rejected. We may have other relationship problems, like we may have trouble forming and maintaining relationship. We are attracted to the wrong people. We may be too independent and have problems with intimacy, because as a child we have to deal with our emotion alone, so we don't trust other people to deal with our problems, especially the emotional ones. Our parents have already shown us that they can help us with our emotion, so we don't expect other people to help us in that area too. Or we may not know how to be warm to other people. Like for example, my mom doesn't hug me, right? So I feel weird hugging other people. Like we don't have this close bonding experience with our parents. So to have this close bonding with a stranger feels very weird and awkward. People with childhood emotion neglect may also idealize or use fantasy to imagine what this ultimate love and bonding is like. We always go into one-sided relationship or unrequited love. It is a way for us to deal with our emotional pain of being emotionally neglected as a child. But in the end, we are just attaching from one person to another person. When we realize that this relationship doesn't work, this one-sided relationship is just our own fantasy, then we'll just reattach to another person. We get infatuated with people very fast, but we don't get into a relationship with others for a long time. Number 3, low self-esteem. People who have low self-esteem can have a variation of belief and things they don't feel good about themselves. They may find that they have an inner critic or are very critical to themselves. They may feel a lack of approval and they may doubt if they can achieve what they want. They may feel unworthy and undeserving of love. People who have childhood emotional neglect can have all these beliefs too. But the most significant belief that we have is there is something wrong with me and I'm not significant. If you grow up with parents telling you like, oh, you're too sensitive, you should not feel this way, toughen up, you may feel like your needs and your emotions are not important. And then they may make you feel that being sensitive is wrong. For example, when I was 13 and I asked my dad whether I can change school, and he just tells me to bear with it because my elder brother is actually in the same school. And if he is happy in that school, then why can't I? So there's something wrong with me, right? We are in the same school, he's okay, he's happy, but I'm not. So the school is not a problem, so that means I'm the problem. And the problem isn't whether I change school or not. The problem is my dad didn't ask further question like, why are you feeling like you need to change school? What happened in your school that makes you feel this way? He wasn't curious about how I feel or what I'm experiencing, and that's why I feel neglected. When you grow up, this low self-esteem will affect many aspects of your life. In a relationship, you always think that you are the problem. Like, why the person never texts me back? Oh, did I say something wrong? Am I the problem? Like, what did I do wrong? In social life, when you see people can easily connect with others in a group, and that will make you feel like an outsider, like I'm the problem, like I'm insignificant. Or even at work, people may achieve something that you don't or are very successful. You will always bring it to yourself like, what's wrong with me? You know how people project their problems to other people and their issue to other people and blame other people for their own problems. People with childhood emotional neglect introjects. We bring the external problem to ourselves. We make ourselves feel like we are the one that is the problem. Can you see how harmful this can be for you? Number 4, confused about your own emotion and find it difficult to regulate your own emotion. So people who feel uncomfortable with their emotion may try to numb their emotion with things like food, alcohol, substance, or TV program. People who are childhood emotionally neglected may also use things to numb their emotion, but more often than not, it's not because it feels uncomfortable. It's more because that we don't know what we're feeling and we don't know what to do when we feel this way. Like, do we express it? In our early days, we are told that we are being too sensitive. So we may start to doubt our own feeling. Is this really what I'm feeling, or are we too sensitive about the things? Also, since we are young, we are always told, or at least it appears to us, that our emotions are not very important. So we have this tendency to focus on other people's emotion instead. Because we didn't receive enough mirroring, we don't know whether this emotion or this feeling or sensation we're feeling, is it our emotion or other people's emotion? We don't know how to differentiate the two. And if a child is not shown how to soothe their emotion when they are young, they may not know how to regulate their own emotion when they become an adult. On the other hand, if your parents soothe you when you're crying, subconsciously you'll learn how to soothe yourself, your own emotion when you grow up. Understanding your own emotion is such a key thing for a relationship. If you don't know when you're feeling angry, if you don't know what irritates you or what you don't like, then you have to wait till someone overstep your boundaries before you realize that, oh, I'm feeling angry or have an anger outburst. But when you have that anger outburst, it may already hurt the relationship that you're in. People will be caught in surprise because they didn't know that you have such boundaries. Or when you feel insecure and anxious in a relationship and you don't know about this, then you keep pursuing the other person, keep going to the other person with this energy, this anxious energy. It's gonna push other people away. Or if you have to depend on the other party to soothe your emotion, then you may end up getting into a codependency relationship. Emotion provide a lot of information about what you're feeling right now. It gives you instant feedback on how you're doing right now. But if you are unaware of your emotion, you don't know how to regulate your emotion, and you just allow your emotion to dictate your action, you will miss the valuable information your emotion provides. You will live a very unstable emotional life, and people will find it difficult to relate to you. Sometimes, as a result of your childhood emotional neglect, you may feel an unexplained resentment and anger towards your parents. But oftentimes, emotional neglect is unintentional. Some parents are just not comfortable with emotions in general, whether is it theirs or other people. So they may ask you not to cry. Or you may have parents who are preoccupied with something major or serious in their life, like a trauma or an illness, and they don't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with your emotion when you're young. But this video is not about your parents. This video is about you. What are you going to do after knowing that you were emotionally neglected as a child? If you feel some resentment or anger towards your parents, watch this next video about forgiving your parents.